Happy Tuesday. Hope you've had a great beginning of your week. It is Tuesday, and the last day that I was with you was last Thursday. I recently started this channel to talk about family conversations to create wealth. I wanted to talk all about financial literacy and the role that it plays in our families. If you've never joined me before, my name is Andrea Davis. I am a retired teacher of 22 years in the classroom. At this point, I am a life insurance agent, and I am also a mother of two and a wife. So I probably resemble your family in one way or another. And so, again, I want to be with you for a while to talk about conversations that would increase our financial literacy. And as a former teacher, I always look forward to, being able to teach or bring some concepts to the forefront. And so it's all about the conversations that we're having in our home. And I often talk about the fact that it's not so much about the homework that your child is bringing home, but it's about what you're doing beyond that homework. And really and truly, hopefully, maybe your children are getting a chance to get most of their homework done at school. I do believe that most of the homework can be done at school before they even get home. So what about your homework that you're having at home? So I am thinking today that we need to talk more about the books that we're reading so that we can have these financial literacy conversations. So, what books are you reading as a family? Let me make some suggestions or add to your library. So, one of the authors that I like to review, and he has lots of titles out there for both adults and children, and that is Robert Kiyosaki. I'm hoping I'm not messing his name up too bad, but he has a few titles, and I'll grab my little list over here, but he has a few titles that stand out that promote conversation for both adults and children. And you can also find him on YouTube. And of course, on YouTube, he's having adult conversation, but his books are very, I believe that his books would really promote great conversation at home. So he has books like Rich Dad, Poor Dad, which, was the book for adults. But then there's Rich Dad, Poor Dad for teens. There's a book that he entitled Money Talks That the Poor and Middle Class Don't Have. There's another book about the unfair advantage, and he refers to the unfair advantage as knowing the power of financial education. He also has a book about how to create assets and how to make your money work for you. So those are just a few of the selections that you'll find under his name. That's Robert Kiyosaki. So I wanted to talk about his books because I do believe that you can read your way to wealth. So just knowing more will help you or empower you to do more with what you have. He is a person that considers himself a real estate investor. When you read about him, he talks about that is the way that he acquired his wealth. And he also talks a lot about growing up and having a rich dad and a poor dad. And the rich dad was not really into the education so much so as the poor dad. The poor dad was in the school system, came up through the ranks of the school system, and always talked about having the traditional education that we talk to our children about. And as a matter of fact, I have, as I think you've heard me say, I have two boys, and my oldest son just graduated from college last year. My youngest son is in college right now. So again, the traditional way of education, going to high school or going to school, getting good grades. And Robert Kiyosaki says that really and truly that school focuses on these traditional methods, And then he says that school is very outdated and that there are so many things about financial education that they do not share in school, and that it is really intentional, which is unfortunate. And I have to say that as a former educator teaching in the school, in the classroom, I taught keyboarding. I did teach, excuse me, I did teach various business classes. Keyboarding and doing word processing was probably the main demand, and that was both on a middle school and high school level. But as Robert Kiyosaki points out, financial literacy was left out. So I can only agree with him. The times that we taught business concepts or talked about money, you really were basically following a blueprint or a curriculum, and you checked off the box, to say that you taught that particular concept and you moved on, and you were observed according to you teaching that blueprint or according to what you were supposed to be teaching. So I can only agree with the whole concept that Robert Kiyosaki talks about, that unfortunately that financial literacy was left out. He refers to money as being its own language, that we need to have money fluency. We talk about fluency with another language, and Robert Kiyosaki says that money has its own language. And so in order for us to have these wealth conversations, then we have to, of course, read more and learn more. So one of the concepts, a couple of the concepts rather, that I'll point out that he talks about, one is, he says that we have never learned truly what assets are. In school, we talk about the difference in between assets and liabilities. And so that's a conversation that you can have at home, whether you have a 10-year-old or you have a 16-year-old. You can talk about what is an asset and what is a liability. And so, of course, whenever Robert Kiyosaki complains or criticizes, he says that we have learned that concept all wrong. So his whole thing about the fact that we consider our house or our mortgage an asset, he says, is really wrong thinking. So in fact, when he lists assets, a house is not one of those items that Robert Kiyosaki describes as an asset, because your house, due to the fact that it has a mortgage, takes money out of your pocket. So that is on the list of being a liability. And so when we think of assets, or when I think of assets, I think that if we had a conversation with our children, with our young children, and to define for them what an asset is, and then ask them to look around and, think about their daily lives and make a list of what is an asset. And that's a great family conversation, because you can, of course, see what they come up with, and then you're going to add to that list and give them an illustration of what is it that is bringing money in and what is it that takes money out. And that will, of course, make them think as they continue year after year, especially when they're asking for things. You can always ask them, hey, is that an asset? Or is that a liability? Is that going to add something to us? Is it going to, bring money in, or is it going to take money out? So that is a very interesting conversation that you can have with the folks in your house. One other point that Robert Kiyosaki makes is about saving for retirement. He doesn't really use the word retirement. He says that we need to figure out how to get out of the rat race. And basically he's saying that the traditional way is to go to school, get a good job, and get your 401k. But his book talks about getting out of that rat race, that is an outdated way of thinking. So instead of looking forward to your 401k, and instead of trying to see how much money you can save, that is not the system that Robert Kiyosaki created when it came to, gaining his riches or becoming wealthy. As a matter of fact, he speaks about the 401k as just not a system or a method to use. So many of us, like myself, like we either have a 401k, or as teachers, you had a 403b, same concept. It was a pre-tax retirement vehicle. And I, like many other teachers, I listened to the presentation, the retirement presentation year after year. And whenever the representative comes and they say, okay, it's time to sign you up, we all flock to that retirement representative. And I have to admit, I really can't specifically say, but I could almost guess. I have to say that you don't always do your due diligence. You sometimes, I found myself thinking, hey, everybody's doing it. It must be a good thing. And as a matter of fact, I had heard my parents say, well, what are you doing about retirement? And so that, of course, led me to believe, hey, I guess I better do something about retirement. And here's a person talking to us about retirement. So I guess this is what I'm supposed to be doing. Unfortunately, I find that now today, I wish I had done my due diligence. Of course, you want to, put away or be ready for, the time whenever you want to either not work the way you have been working, or you want to do something different. Of course, you want to have, something aside. However, knowing now that 403B is a pre-tax retirement vehicle, that it has tax consequences later on, I would love to have known more information. And so it was much, much later that I came to the conclusion, or to the knowledge, that this is a captive agent who comes every year to offer the same product from the same company. And they're doing what they know, they're doing what they're taught to do. This is how they earn their commission. So it's working for them. It just isn't working for me. I don't believe that you make an informed decision when you basically are doing what everybody else is doing. People have families, people have lives, and there's no cookie cutter way to do retirement. So I, in fact, today wish I had done my due diligence and wish I knew more about ways to be more tax efficient regarding my retirement. And so that is a huge conversation, or a way of living, that when it comes to the wealthy, they are always invested in, or they're having the conversations about how do we get rid of the tax liabilities. So being more efficient in your taxes, having strategies to be more efficient. And so Robert Kiyosaki uses real estate as his strategy to avoid the tax consequences. And so when it comes to having more assets, the way that you can enjoy those assets, of course, is that you have already done the research as to how those assets can avoid the tax liabilities. And so with a 401k or a 403b, you're basically putting off the tax liability that you're going to have later. And, we want to assume, hey, that we're going to, not need as much or live off of less in retirement. That's the way that it's marketed to us. But I don't know of anybody who wants to really live off of less. I know if you know any teacher, you've probably heard teachers complain. And I just don't know of anybody, teacher or not teacher, who wants to live off of less. So the whole conversation that we need to be having in our homes, the financial family conversations that we need to be having in our home, is not just a conversation that adults need to be having. I grew up with, just my mother and father having those financial conversations. And I tuned out, but basically we were always instructed to tune out because that was an adult topic. And so now today I am advocating for family conversations about money, because as Robert Kiyosaki said, it is its own language. So I'm advocating that we should be having financial conversations with the whole family. Your son, your daughter, they should not be left out. Some people think somehow that boys need to know more for whatever reason, maybe because they're going to be the breadwinner, going to take care of the family. And then some people have the perspective that females need to know more because they're going to have to take care of themselves, and you don't want them to need somebody, or you don't want them to be dependent. But everybody needs to be included in the family conversation about money, about financial matters. There's always going to be something, that's way, way personal, but for the most part, your child can take an active part in those conversations. So, today just wanted to introduce that word or that concept to have a conversation with them about assets versus liabilities, define assets, define liabilities, and let's see how they respond. Let's see if they can paraphrase or they can summarize what you just told them about the difference between assets and liabilities, and then ask them to make a list of assets and a list of liabilities. And that's going to be a real conversation starter for your family. So be sure to have that conversation. And I'm going to build on this information from Robert Kiyosaki, because as I said, we're going to read our way to wealth. Keep in mind, like I said, that he has written several books about financial literacy, about what the school system is not doing. So my urge to you is to do your family projects, your family conversations, to start these conversations, have these conversations at home. And this way it just becomes normal. It doesn't become taboo. The conversation about money doesn't become taboo. It's just normal, let it be a normal thing. So I've enjoyed being with you today. Okay. And I hope that you have a great rest of your day. And I'll see you again on Thursday.